The weeks turned into months, and Rivergate began to carry itself differently. The shock of the market incident had not been forgotten, but the city was slowly shaping it into something meaningful. In meetings, in schools, and in homes, people spoke more often about patience, about pausing before reacting, and about how quickly fear can turn into harm. What began as a painful mistake had become a lesson shared across an entire community. Ryan's case reached its official end when the police department released its ruling. He would not be dismissed entirely, but his return came with conditions. He was reinstated on probation, required to complete community service hours, and placed under extra supervision. He was also ordered to attend every single de-escalation training session and help evaluate their success. For many, it felt like a fair balance, accountability paired with the chance to grow. For Ryan, it was a lifeline he did not take lightly. The first day he returned to patrol duty, he felt nervous. His uniform, once a source of pride, now carried extra weight. But when he entered a grocery store to respond to a small dispute, he practiced the steps he had learned. He identified himself calmly, used clear words, and listened. The argument ended without a single raised hand. The store manager shook his hand, and Ryan walked out feeling for the first time in months that trust could be rebuilt slowly, piece by piece. Meanwhile, Isabel continued her work with steady determination. She spoke at conferences about the power of calm leadership. She shared the Rivergate story, not to shame but to inspire. She explained how one wrong action had opened the door to reform and how communities can heal when they choose accountability over anger. Her words traveled beyond Rivergate, reaching other cities that began asking for similar training programs. The joint sessions at the training center grew larger. Officers from neighboring towns attended, curious about the program that had earned national headlines. Community volunteers signed up in higher numbers, eager to help shape the culture of safety. Teachers brought their students to watch and learn about decision-making under pressure. The program became less about one incident and more about a movement, proof that reform was possible when people were willing to work together. For the little girl at the center of it all, life began to return to normal. She no longer flinched at every loud sound. Her mother told friends that she slept peacefully again. At the market, the fruit vendor Arturo kept his promise and handed her an apple for courage every time she visited. She smiled, and the simple act reminded everyone that healing was not just for officers and leaders, it was for families, too. The teenage boy who had caused the accidental bump started volunteering at the training center on weekends. He helped set up chairs, carried boxes, and sometimes played the role of a bystander in the drills. Isabel encouraged him, telling him that responsibility is not about never making mistakes but about choosing to stand up after them. His confidence grew, and he began to see himself not as the cause of trouble but as part of the solution. One crisp autumn morning, Isabel and Ryan crossed paths again at a public event. It was not planned, they simply found themselves on the same stage during a forum on community safety. The air was cool, the trees behind them golden with falling leaves. Ryan spoke first, telling the audience that he had learned humility. He said that mistakes are heavy, but they can be carried if they are turned into lessons. Isabel followed, reminding everyone that titles and uniforms matter less than humanity. See the person first, she said. Always see the person. The audience rose in a standing ovation, not because of perfection but because of honesty. People clapped not for flawless heroes but for flawed humans who had chosen growth over denial. That moment became a symbol in Rivergate, proof that even in failure, dignity can be restored when truth is faced with courage. By the end of the year, reports showed a decline in force incidents across the city. More situations were being resolved through communication rather than escalation. Families felt safer in public spaces, and trust between the police and community had begun to mend. Rivergate had not become perfect, but it had become better, and better mattered. Ryan continued his probation with quiet determination. He never asked for praise, but he showed up early, stayed late, and treated every call as a chance to practice patience. Over time, fellow officers noticed the change. Some even said his calm words in tense moments helped guide them, too. In a way, his mistake had turned him into a living reminder for everyone else: be careful, be patient, be human. Isabel remained a respected leader, but more than that, she became a symbol of composure. People admired her not just for her title but for her grace in the face of harm. Her calm had prevented a market crowd from exploding, had turned anger into reform, and had set the course for lasting change. And so, Rivergate moved forward. The market that had once been the stage of shock returned to being a place of joy, music, and laughter. The sound of children running between stalls was no longer shadowed by fear. When people walked past the toy stall where everything began, they did not only remember the strike. They remembered the lesson that followed: patience can save a city, calm can guide a community, and even painful mistakes can be rewritten into something good when people choose to learn. The story of Rivergate spread, not as a scandal but as a testament. Other towns asked, how did they do it? The answer was simple and complex at the same time. They listened. They admitted. They practiced. They forgave, not by forgetting, but by building something better. In the end, Ryan and Isabel's paths crossed again and again, not as enemies, not as friends, but as two people who shared a responsibility to keep their city steady. Each time they nodded to one another, it was a silent reminder that growth is possible, even in the hardest of places. And so the final note of the story was not of anger, nor of punishment, but of renewal. A city had taken one man's mistake and one woman's calm, and turned them into a guide for the future. The lesson echoed quietly in every corner of Rivergate: take a breath, see the person, and let patience lead the way. Thought for 7 seconds the morning sun touched the city gently, like a warm hand on a sleepy face. Office workers hurried along the sidewalks, holding coffee cups and phones. Shopkeepers rolled up metal shutters. A street musician tuned his guitar and tried a few soft notes. Buses hissed and stopped. Cars made little beeps at the light. People crossed, talked, and laughed. In the middle of this busy scene, a young woman named Emily walked with a calm step and a thoughtful gaze. She wore a light blue dress and simple flats. Her hair was tied back in a neat ponytail. She carried a small leather bag and a book with a ribbon as a bookmark. She did not rush. She took in the morning air like someone who had chosen to have a quiet day. She paused outside a small cafe that had flowers in painted pots along the window. The handwritten chalkboard read, fresh muffins, cinnamon rolls, and hot coffee. The smell of warm pastry drifted into the street. Emily smiled and decided to go inside. A gentle bell rang above the door. The space felt friendly. There were round tables, a shelf of plants in little terracotta cups, and old pictures of the neighborhood on the wall. The barista, a young woman with a kind face and a name tag that said Mia, greeted her with a soft hello. Emily returned the greeting and asked, in her clear, polite voice, for a medium coffee and a cinnamon roll. She paid, left a small tip, and took a seat near the window. She opened her book, but she did not start to read right away. She liked watching people. She liked the way the world moved when a day began. A man in a gray suit tied his tie again as he walked. A mother lifted her crying toddler and whispered something sweet. Two students laughed and bumped shoulders. An older gentleman sat on the bench outside and unfolded his newspaper. Emily felt content. The simple joy of being part of a living city was enough for her. Mia brought the coffee and the cinnamon roll on a small plate. "Enjoy," she said with a friendly smile. Emily thanked her and took a sip. The coffee was smooth and warm. The cinnamon roll was soft and sweet, with a little glaze that shone in the light. She broke off a piece and let it melt in her mouth. She thought of the day ahead. She had some errands to run. She wanted to visit a bookstore a few blocks away and pick up a gift for a friend. She had a list in her bag, written in tidy handwriting. Outside, two police officers walked their usual route along the square. One was tall with a square jaw and careful hair. The other was shorter and moved in quick, sharp steps. Their badges caught the sun. They looked around with a serious air. People stepped aside to let them pass. They were known in that area. Some people felt safe when they saw them. Others felt nervous. The officers often asked questions that felt heavy. They had a habit of reading people quickly and drawing conclusions too fast. As they came near the cafe, the taller officer looked through the window and noticed Emily sitting alone with her coffee and book. She looked calm and well dressed, but not flashily so. She looked like someone who did not need attention. The shorter officer followed his partner's gaze. He raised an eyebrow. They exchanged a look without words. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was a feeling that they should check things. Perhaps it was simply a habit of stepping in when there was no real reason to do so. They pushed open the door. The bell rang again. The cafe grew a little quieter, the way small rooms do when people in uniform enter. Mia glanced up and then back down, busy with the milk steamer. The manager, a middle-aged man named Mr. Patel, looked up from the register and nodded faintly out of politeness. The officers walked in a slow circle, looking at the pastry case, the tables, the exits. Then they walked toward Emily's table. "Good morning," the taller officer said. His voice was plain, but there was a hard edge under it. "How are we today?" Emily looked up with a gentle smile. "Good morning. I'm fine, thank you." "What brings you here?" the shorter officer asked. He stood close, as if the room were more crowded than it was. Emily blinked, slightly puzzled. "Just coffee. And a cinnamon roll," she said kindly. "It's very good." "Do you come here often?" the taller one asked. His eyes moved over the table, the book, the bag. "Not very often," Emily said. "But I like it here." The questions felt strange to her. They were not friendly questions, though the words were simple. It was the tone. It pressed into her peace. Emily was careful. She kept her voice steady and respectful. She remembered that sometimes people in authority forgot the weight of their own presence. The shorter officer tilted his head. "Where are you headed after this?" Emily looked down at her book for a moment, then back up. "I have a few errands." "A bookstore. Maybe the flower stand." "Do you have identification?" the taller officer said. He asked it quickly, as if they were already done with small talk. Emily's smile faded, not out of fear, but out of sadness. "May I ask why?" she said softly. "Routine," the shorter one said. "We're checking on things. Nothing to worry about." His voice was not loud, but people nearby heard it. A couple at the next table exchanged glances. Mia slowed her hands for a second and then kept working, the milk steamer hissing like a quiet warning. Mr. Patel stood still, watching. The older man on the bench outside, visible through the window, looked up from his newspaper and narrowed his eyes. "I'm just having coffee," Emily said. "Is there a problem?" The taller officer's jaw tightened. "We ask the questions," he said. His tone was still low, but it had sharpened. "Please present ID." Emily took a breath. She had nothing to hide. She always carried her ID. She could show it and make the moment pass. But there was something inside her that urged patience and wisdom. She thought about how many people in the city might feel the same pressure for no good reason. She thought about how respect should not depend on who you are or what your name is. She also knew that if she refused, the scene might grow bigger than it needed to be. She decided to stay calm and careful. "I understand," she said softly. "I will show my ID. But may I finish my sip of coffee first?" The shorter officer gave a little laugh that did not sound warm. We don't have all day, he said. Emily took a small sip and set the cup down. Her hands did not shake. She opened her bag slowly, not to cause alarm, and took out her wallet. She did not pull out the card yet. She placed the wallet on the table and folded her hands over it. She looked at the taller officer. "I'm happy to cooperate," she said. "But I would like to know what made you ask me and not the other people here." The taller officer opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced around as if the answer might be on the wall. The shorter officer spoke first. "We decide who to check. It's our judgment. Please don't make this difficult." A young man who had been typing on a laptop at the corner table lifted his eyes. He looked at Emily. He looked at the officers. He looked at his phone. His thumb hovered, as if deciding whether to press record. Next to him, a woman in a green sweater bit her lip and then stared into her cup, not sure if she should say anything. The cafe had become a stage. No one had planned it. No one wanted it. Yet it was happening. Mr. Patel stepped forward a little. "Officers," he said politely, "is everything all right? She is a regular customer here." The shorter officer did not even turn his head. "Sir, please go back to your work." Mr. Patel nodded and stepped back. His eyes met Emily's for a brief moment, offering a small apology he could not speak out loud. Emily kept her tone even. "I am not refusing," she said. "I only asked a question. Here is my ID, as you requested." She slid the card out from her wallet and held it gently between two fingers. She did not raise it up high. She did not make a show of it. She simply offered it to the taller officer. He took it with a steady hand but a guarded look. The shorter officer leaned in, too close, as if the letters might run away if he did not trap them with his eyes. Before they looked, the taller officer asked another question. "What are you doing in this part of town?" Emily placed her hands back on the table. "I like the cafe," she said. "I like the flower stand. I like the bookstore." She paused. "I like the people." There was no anger in her words. It was almost tender. For a second, it disarmed the moment. Even the milk steamer seemed to soften its hiss. But the shorter officer cleared his throat and brought the tension back. He nodded at his partner. "Go on," he said. "Check it." The taller officer looked down at the card. He began to read the name. He read the first name. He read the last name. His eyes moved in a quick, small motion that only someone studying him would notice. He did not react yet. He was careful to show nothing. He handed the card to his partner without a word. The shorter officer took it and glanced at it with a grin that said he expected nothing unusual. The cafe was quiet. The guitar outside had stopped. The newspaper on the bench did not move. The young man with the laptop lowered his eyes, as if afraid that looking too hard would break something fragile. In the silence, Emily's coffee cup made a small clink against the saucer as it settled. The shorter officer held the card a heartbeat longer than usual. Then he tilted it slightly to get a better look at a small line on the bottom. His grin faded just a little. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought. He passed the card back to his partner. Nobody spoke. The air felt heavier, even though nothing loud had happened. Emily kept her calm. She did not reach for the card yet. She let them have their moment. She let the room breathe. She let the question sit between them like a small, smooth stone that no one wanted to pick up. Mia wiped the counter with slow circles, watching with a worried look she tried to hide. Mr. Patel stood still again, hands folded. The older man outside folded his newspaper and pressed it under his arm, now peering in through the glass as if the cafe were a scene from a play. The taller officer took a small breath and looked at Emily again. He did not ask the next question. He did not hand back the card. For the first time since they walked in, he seemed unsure of his own steps. The shorter officer shifted his weight and looked toward the door, then back to the table. Emily finally spoke, with kindness that did not bend. "Is there anything else you need from me?" she asked. The taller officer's mouth opened and closed. He seemed to be choosing from several answers at once. The shorter officer's fingers tapped lightly on his belt, a quiet rhythm of unease. The cafe waited, as if the room itself could hold its breath. Outside, a bus pulled away from the curb. The street musician tried a new song. A small dog barked at a pigeon. Life moved on, but here, at the little window table, time felt slow and thick. The morning light shifted across the floor, and the shadow of the potted plant drew a new line over Emily's shoe. The taller officer looked down at the card one more time. He did not say what he had just noticed. He did not say what he was starting to understand. He only said, in a quieter voice than before, "One moment, please." Emily nodded once. She folded her hands and waited. The room stayed silent. The story had taken a turn, and no one yet knew what the next breath would bring. The taller officer held the card and stepped back half a pace, not far, but enough to show a small change in the air around the table. He looked at the shorter officer and then at Emily again, as if the card and the person in front of him had not joined together in his mind yet. His voice had lost its sharpness. He cleared his throat and spoke into his radio, but so quietly that most people could not hear. The shorter officer kept his eyes on Emily's face, searching for a reason to keep control of the moment. The cafe felt like a stage with lights turned low, everyone listening for the next line. Emily sat still, hands resting softly on the table, palms open, nothing hidden. She watched the taller officer without fear. She did not try to explain herself. She did not rush to fill the silence. She trusted that calm could be stronger than noise. The gentle smell of coffee and cinnamon settled in the room again, but there was still a tightness in the air, a feeling that a knot was about to be pulled loose. Mia, the barista, set a glass of water near Emily's elbow. She did it quietly and gave a tiny nod, a sign of care without words. Emily gave a small smile of thanks. Mr. Patel stood a few steps behind, his hands folded, his eyes moving between the officers and his customers. He had run this cafe for many years. He believed in peace, in friendly faces, and in the simple kindness of serving people well. He wished he could fix this with a tray of warm muffins and patient listening, but he knew some moments required a different kind of courage. The shorter officer shifted his weight and spoke, aiming for steady. "You said you have errands," he said. "What kind of errands?" Emily answered in her even, gentle tone. "A bookstore," she said. "Some flowers. A gift for a friend." She paused, then added, "It is a good morning for small things." The words were soft, but they carried. A woman in a green sweater looked up and met Emily's eyes for the first time. The young man with the laptop had already opened his phone camera. He held it low and angled, not waving it around, just recording quietly. The older man on the bench outside had stood up and come to the window. He cupped his hands around his face to see past the reflections. A delivery bike rolled by and slowed, the rider turning his head as the bell over the cafe door chimed again from a new customer who stepped in and then froze, sensing the heavy pause in the room. The taller officer's radio gave a soft crackle. He turned slightly, listening. His face changed in a careful, slow way. It was not shock and not fear, yet more like a thread pulling through his expression, tugging at what he thought he knew. He looked down at the card again and traced a line on the bottom with his eyes. Then he glanced over his shoulder toward the window, toward the world beyond the glass, toward the building across the square where the state flag hung from a pole. "Ma'am," the shorter officer said, still trying to guide the moment, "we need to step outside for a minute." Emily shook her head once. "I prefer to stay here," she said politely. "It is public. It is safe. I am comfortable." The shorter officer's jaw tightened. His voice rose half a step, not loud, but clear. "We can do this outside." Emily kept her tone gentle. "You can ask your questions here," she said. "I am answering them." There was a quiet sound, almost like a sigh, but it came from the crowd, a small release of breath from people who were waiting to see if the moment would break. The young man with the laptop, whose hands had been shaking, steadied the phone. The woman in the green sweater looked down at her cup and then up again, as if to keep courage in her chest. The delivery rider leaned his bike on the window and stayed there, watching through the glass like someone watching a story through a screen. The taller officer finished listening to the voice on the radio and clicked it off. He stood a little straighter, then a little stiffer. He handed the card back to the shorter officer, who took it with a light frown as if a simple plastic card could suddenly weigh more than before. He read the full name now, really read it, not just glanced at it. His mouth opened, then closed. He read it again. He held the card closer, checking the photo, the date, the small seal, the fine print at the bottom, the line that confirmed the identity. He had seen the governor on television many times, giving updates, visiting schools, opening new parks, speaking at community centers. He had heard the last name in news clips and in morning meetings. He had even joked once with a friend about how tidy that name looked on a banner. He looked back at Emily, and her face made sense with the card now, not because of how she looked but because of how she carried herself, steady, polite, composed. A piece clicked into place in his mind, and then another. The taller officer watched his partner, and his own face changed a little too. Neither officer said the name out loud. Neither made a big show. But the cafe could feel the shift, the way a room feels a quiet change in the weather. Mia's hand paused over the counter once more. Mr. Patel exhaled through his nose and took a small step toward the register, then stopped, unsure if he should move at all. The older man outside tilted his head, reading the officers' faces as if they were a newspaper headline. Emily noticed the change as well, but she did not lean into it. She did not push. She kept her posture relaxed and her voice soft. "Would you like to return my card?" she asked. The shorter officer looked down at his hand as if surprised to find the card still there. "Yes," he said quickly, and passed it back in a careful, almost respectful way. He straightened his belt. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Emily said. A new voice entered the scene, small and bright. A little girl at a table near the door tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered a question. Her mother pressed a finger to her lips and said, "SHH," but with kindness. The girl rested her chin on the table and watched with wide eyes, her crayon drawing forgotten. The taller officer cleared his throat again. "Ma'am," he said, "we appreciate your cooperation." The words came out steady, but the edges were softer now. "Do you have any other identification?" It was a strange question, as if he needed one more moment to confirm what he already knew. Emily reached for her bag. "Yes," she said, "I have a work badge and a library card. Which would you like?" "That will not be necessary," the shorter officer said quickly, and then he glanced at his partner, who gave a tiny nod. The shorter officer looked back at Emily. "Thank you. That's fine." There was another small exhale from the room. The young man with the laptop looked down at his phone screen to check the recording, then up at the officers. He still said nothing. The woman in the green sweater took a sip and set her cup down slowly, as if testing a table that might still wobble. The delivery rider lifted his bike a little, ready to leave, then set it back down and kept watching. "Am I free to enjoy my coffee?" Emily asked, her tone polite, almost gentle enough to pass as a friendly reminder. "Yes," the taller officer said. "Of course." The shorter officer nodded stiffly. "You're fine," he said. "Please continue." The words were simple, but they came with a weight of change. The officers had stepped back. The pressure had eased. Yet there was still a thin line of tension, a line that might snap the other way now. People in the cafe began to breathe a little deeper. Soft sounds returned, a spoon stirring a cup, the milk steamer's whisper, a chair sliding in, the door's bell chiming as a nervous customer decided to leave and then changed their mind and stayed. Emily lifted her coffee and took a small sip. She looked out the window at the flag across the square, then back at the officers. "Thank you," she said again, in the same even tone she had used from the beginning. The taller officer nodded once, and for a second his eyes held a look that could have been apology or respect or a mix of both. The shorter officer cleared his throat, glanced at the people watching, and straightened his shoulders. He seemed to remember the crowd only now, the phones, the quiet eyes, the many witnesses to a small but important moment. From outside, a new sound rose, a small cluster of voices. Two workers in orange vests had stopped on the sidewalk. A student with a backpack had joined the older man at the window. Someone whispered and pointed, not at Emily, but at the officers. The room could hear just enough to make the whispers feel louder than they were. The taller officer looked toward the door. "We should go," he said softly to his partner. "Right," the shorter officer replied, but he did not move yet. He seemed to be choosing his next step with care, as if the floor might creak the wrong way. Before they could turn, Mr. Patel found his voice. It was not loud or rude. It was the voice of a person who has watched a lot of mornings and learned the value of simple words. "Officers," he said, "thank you for keeping the city safe. And thank you for speaking respectfully." The shorter officer looked at him, surprised. The taller officer gave a small nod. "We appreciate that," he said, and he meant it, though his face still held that careful stiffness of someone trying not to trip over his own pride. Emily placed her ID back in her wallet and slid it into her bag. She did it slowly, without hurry, as if the act itself needed time to settle into the morning. Then she broke off a small piece of the cinnamon roll and tasted it, closing her eyes for a second as if to return fully to the simple joy she had planned for this hour. A man at the corner table, who had been silent the whole time, lifted his cup and said, "Good coffee today," to no one in particular. It was a small bridge back to normal life. A few people crossed it. They smiled, moved, whispered less, and tried to focus on their own mornings again. But the story had already taken root in the room. It would not be forgotten. The shorter officer finally took a step back. "We'll be on our way," he said. "Have a good day, everyone." The bell on the door chimed as they moved toward it. The taller officer touched the edge of his hat in a gesture that was almost a salute, almost an apology, and then let his hand drop. They were two figures moving through a small space filled with quiet eyes and careful hearts. They reached the door and paused for a half beat, as if the air outside might feel different now. Before they left, the taller officer turned once more. He looked at Emily. He looked at the card no longer in his hand. He seemed to be weighing a choice between silence and words. At last, he chose a middle path. "Thank you for your patience," he said. The words were simple. The room heard the extra meaning behind them. "You're welcome," Emily replied. "Please take care today." They stepped out. The street took them in, with its buses and bikes and the soft scrape of shoes on pavement. The older man with the newspaper tipped his head at them. The workers in orange vests watched them go. The student pressed his lips together and then let them part into a slow breath. Inside the cafe, the room relaxed one notch, not all the way, but enough for shoulders to drop and cups to clink and voices to rise just above a whisper. Mia came to the table with a napkin and slid it near the plate. "Fresh glaze," she said, voice light but eyes warm, "makes everything better." Emily smiled. "It does help," she said. "Thank you, Mia." "You're welcome," Mia replied, and then she leaned in, not too close, and whispered, "You handled that well." Emily's smile turned softer. "Sometimes quiet is the strongest thing," she said. A small hush fell again, but it was a gentle hush now, like a blanket instead of a wall. The young man with the laptop stopped recording and placed his phone face down, his hands shaking less than before. He opened his mouth as if to speak and then decided to say only, "Nice day for reading," with a hopeful smile toward the book on the table. "It is," Emily said. Outside, the officers reached the corner and paused in the bright light. The taller one lifted his radio again, listening, nodding, saying very little. The shorter one looked back once, just once, toward the cafe window, then away. If anyone had been close enough, they might have heard a few soft words, "We should have asked better." But only the wind heard them, and the wind was kind. Inside, Emily turned a page of her book at last. The story on the paper was different from the story that had just happened, but both were about people trying to do the right thing in a world that sometimes made it hard. She took another sip of coffee, warm and steady. The morning moved forward, and the city did, too, carrying the quiet lesson that had been planted in a small cafe by a window, that respect is not a favor, and calm can be a compass. Near the door, the little girl lifted her crayon again and drew a sun over the corner of her page. She added a small table under it, a cup, a roll, and a smiling person with neat hair, sitting by the window while two tall figures walked away down a bright street. Her mother looked at the drawing and kissed the top. The cafe slowly breathed again after the officers stepped outside. Voices rose a little, then fell, like waves that were not sure if the storm had passed. The young man with the laptop kept his phone face down for a moment, then lifted it and checked the quiet video he had recorded. It showed simple things: Emily's calm face, the officer's stiff posture, the way the room went still. It did not show any shouting, because there had been none. It did not show any dramatic move, because there had been none. It showed something small but important: a person being questioned for no clear reason, choosing calm instead of anger, and an entire room learning how to be brave with silence. Mia wiped the counter in slow, neat lines and glanced at Mr. Patel. "Is she all right?" she whispered. "She is steady," Mr. Patel said. "Very steady." He looked at the ID still in his memory, the simple plastic with a familiar last name printed in clean letters. He remembered a framed photo near the back wall, from a summer 2 years ago, when the governor had visited the square to open a reading garden. The same last name was printed on the banner in that photo. He did not rush to speak it. He did not want to turn a quiet truth into gossip. He looked at Emily instead and saw a person who wanted peace more than attention. Emily took another sip of coffee and watched the street through the window. The bus pulled up again. The street musician tried a gentle melody and nodded to a passerby. The older man with the newspaper stood just outside, not leaving, simply making sure the morning stayed kind. The little girl near the door added a flower to her drawing. Emily felt the room's careful care and let it warm her without changing her face. The young man with the laptop opened a simple social app and began to type. He did not use names. He did not stir the fire for the sake of noise. He wrote, "Saw a calm person handled roughly at Sunflower Cafe. No shouting. No crime. Just questions that felt wrong. She stayed kind. Thought we should all be more like her." He attached the short video, not to hurt anyone, but to show how small things matter. He pressed post, then put the phone away again and told himself, "That's enough." Outside, half a block away, the taller officer and the shorter officer stood near a traffic light and tried to collect themselves. The taller officer listened to voices on the radio. The shorter officer stared at his shoes and then at the sky. They were not bad men. But they were learning suddenly, sharply, how much tone matters, how much choice matters, how much a moment can turn into a mirror you cannot ignore. The taller officer's radio crackled with a clear voice from the station. It was their sergeant. The message was short, but it carried a weight that made both men straighten at once. The sergeant had seen the name in a system check. The sergeant had seen a post that was already moving. The sergeant said a few exact words that felt like a bell ringing in the mind. "Do you understand who that was?" The taller officer said, "Yes," though the word did not fix the feeling in his chest. The shorter officer felt heat prickle along his neck. He understood, and he did not like the picture of himself that understanding created. They turned at the same time and looked back at the cafe door. The bell above it was a small thing. The room inside was a small room. But the choice they faced did not feel small. The taller officer took a breath. "We need to go back," he said. They stepped in. The bell chimed softly, and the room fell almost quiet again. Not silent, cups still clinked, milk still steamed, but quiet in a listening way. The older man with the newspaper eased in behind them and stood near the wall, as if to keep the edges of the moment gentle. The young man with the laptop did not lift his phone. He watched with his eyes instead. The little girl looked up, then down at her drawing, then up again. Emily turned in her chair. Her posture was the same, simple, balanced, generous with calm. She did not speak first. She waited. The taller officer touched the brim of his hat and let his hand fall. His voice was steady but stripped of any hard edge. "Ma'am," he said, "we would like to apologize." The shorter officer's mouth was dry. He swallowed and tried to find the right words. He was used to giving directions, not apologies. But the room helped him. The soft plants on the shelf, the warm smell of cinnamon, the quiet eyes, everything in the cafe made the right words closer than they would have been on a cold street. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "We spoke without care. We should have asked better." Emily nodded. She did not make them climb a tall hill. She did not add shame to what was already heavy. She spoke gently, clearly. "Thank you," she said. "I accept your apology." She paused for a breath. "I hope we can all learn from today." The taller officer nodded. "Yes," he said. "We will." Mia set down a glass of water on the counter a little too quickly and almost spilled it. She caught it and smiled shyly, like someone who wanted to clap but knew that clapping would make the moment loud. Mr. Patel took one step forward. He did not raise his voice. "We appreciate your words," he said to the officers. "We also appreciate that this cafe is a place where people can sit in peace." He looked at Emily with respect that was not noisy. "Thank you for being patient." The shorter officer's eyes moved to the people in the room and then back to Emily. He took a breath. "May I say something else?" he asked. "You may," Emily said. He spoke slowly, choosing simple words. "I have a younger sister," he said. "She goes to a cafe before work. If someone spoke to her the way I spoke today, I would not like it." He stopped and found his breath again. "I will remember that." "Thank you," Emily said again. Her voice was warm. "I believe that will help." The young man in the corner lifted his phone halfway and then lowered it. Emily noticed. She gave him a small nod that said, gently, "Be careful." He understood. He did not need to record every second to make a good thing real. Some things live better in memory and in action than on a screen. A small hand went up at a table near the door. The little girl looked at her mother, who smiled and nodded. The girl turned in her chair toward Emily. "Can I say something?" she asked. Emily's eyes softened. "Of course," she said. The girl held up her drawing, which now showed a table by a window, a cup, a circle like a cinnamon roll, two tall figures walking away, and a person with neat hair smiling at the sun. "I drew you," she said, "because you were brave without being loud." A quiet smile moved through the room like a shared candle. The taller officer looked at the drawing and then at Emily and then at the floor. The shorter officer looked at the drawing and wondered why the simple warmth behind his eyes stung a little. The cafe door opened again, and a person in a light jacket stepped in with a calm, clear face. He wore no uniform. He carried a small notepad. He introduced himself quietly as a community affairs officer. "I'm here to see if anyone needs help," he said. "We can take statements, but we do not have to. We can also just listen." Emily turned to him and gave a small, respectful nod. "Thank you," she said. "I am fine. I would like to finish my coffee. If you wish to speak with others here, that is all right. I do not wish to make a formal complaint. I do wish something good to grow from this." The community affairs officer understood at once. "Training," he said softly. "We can do that." "Yes," Emily said. "Training in how to speak. Training in how to see people as people. Training that reminds all of us that respect should not depend on a name." Mr. Patel looked at the framed photo on the back wall, the one with the reading garden, and then back at Emily. He still had not said the last name out loud. He would not. It was not needed. The goodness of her request stood on its own. The taller officer took a breath as if he was about to step into a river. "Ma'am," he said, "may we apologize to everyone, not just to you?" Emily nodded. "That would be kind." The officers turned to the room. The shorter officer's voice was plain and honest. "We're sorry, everyone," he said. "We brought tension into your morning without cause. We should have handled our questions with care and respect." The taller officer added, "We will report this and ask for guidance. We will do better." The room stood very still. No one clapped. No one jeered. The response was softer and better than noise, a hush that felt like acceptance. The older man with the newspaper put his hand over his heart for a brief second and then let it drop. Mia nodded. The young man with the laptop felt his shoulders lower in a way he had not noticed he needed. Emily looked at the officers and then at the community affairs officer. "Thank you," she said. "Perhaps, in a week or two, you can visit this cafe again, not to check, but to listen. People here have good ideas." "We can do that," the community affairs officer said. He wrote a small note in his pad and underlined it. A phone buzzed in Emily's bag, a soft, polite sound. She checked it. A message from her father's office asked a simple question: "Are you safe?" Emily typed back, "Yes. All is well. Please focus on kindness, not blame." She put the phone away and returned to the moment in front of her. The taller officer squared his shoulders, not in pride now, but in readiness to be better. "Thank you for your patience," he said once more. "Please take care today," Emily replied. "All of us can." The officers stepped back toward the door. The bell chimed. They moved out into the light and stood for a second on the sidewalk as if the sun itself were advice. They spoke to the community affairs officer, who joined them outside. The three of them stood in a small circle and talked in low voices about schedules, sessions, and how to make listening a practice instead of an emergency tool. Inside, Emily took the last bite of her cinnamon roll and the last sip of coffee. The room felt lighter now, like a window had been opened. Mr. Patel brought a small plate with a new roll and set it down with a gentle smile. "On the house," he said. "You made our morning better." Emily smiled back. "You have already done that with your kindness," she said. "But thank you. I will take it for a friend." Mia leaned in and spoke softly. "There are yellow tulips at the flower stand today," she said. "They look like little suns." "I will buy some," Emily said. "They fit the day." She stood and slipped her book into her bag. She left a normal tip, not large and loud, just right for a good morning and kind service. She thanked Mia and Mr. Patel, smiled at the little girl and said, "Your drawing made the room brighter," and nodded to the young man with the laptop, who lifted his hand in a small wave and did not reach for his phone. She stepped toward the door. The older man with the newspaper held it open for her, and she thanked him, too. On the sidewalk, the air felt fresh. The flag across the square moved a little in the light breeze. The street musician played a tune that sounded like a walk with a friend. Emily crossed to the flower stand and chose a small bundle of yellow tulips. The vendor wrapped them in brown paper and tied them with a thin string. "For someone special?" he asked. "For the city," Emily said with a gentle smile. "It could use some color today." She walked past the officers, who stood with the community affairs officer and a supervisor who had quietly joined them. They did not stop her. They did not need to. She gave them a small nod. They returned it, and the nods felt like a promise instead of a performance. As she moved toward the bookstore, the young man's post from the corner table began to travel from one phone to another. People did not share it because of a famous name, most did not know the name. They shared it because they saw something rare and true, calm used as strength, apology used as repair, a small room choosing respect. The story was growing, but it was growing in a good direction, watered by gentleness instead of anger. Emily stepped into the bookstore and breathed in the soft smell of paper and ink. She chose a gift for her friend, a collection of simple poems about ordinary days. She paid, tucked the book beside the tulips, and walked back into the light. The city moved around her, bright and busy. Somewhere behind her, a plan was already forming for listening sessions and better words. Somewhere ahead of her, the day opened like a quiet path. She walked it with the same steady grace she had carried into the cafe, and the lesson of the morning walked with her: respect is not given because of a title, it is given because we all share the same street, the same sunlight, and the same hope to be seen with kindness. The news of what happened at the cafe did not stay within those four walls. By the time Emily had left with her yellow tulips and new book of poems, the small video shared by the young man in the corner had already reached hundreds of people. Within hours, it was seen by thousands. People did not know her full name, and most did not even realize she was the governor's daughter. What they saw was enough: a young woman being questioned without reason, staying calm, and gently reminding everyone that respect should not depend on a title. At the governor's office, advisors rushed in with their phones and tablets. They showed the governor the short clip. He watched quietly, his face thoughtful. His daughter's calm voice, her patience, and her final words in the cafe touched him deeply. He knew she could have revealed her identity at any moment and ended the officer's behavior instantly. But she had chosen not to. She had chosen to stand as any ordinary citizen would, reminding everyone that dignity should be given freely, not demanded by status. The governor was upset, not only as a father but as a leader. Yet, when his staff suggested punishment or dismissal for the officers, he shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "We do not solve thoughtless behavior with anger. My daughter already showed the right path. We will respond with learning, not revenge." Meetings were quickly called. The police department's leadership gathered in a plain, serious conference room. The two officers who had been at the cafe sat at one end of the long table. Their faces were pale, their hands folded tightly. They knew the storm outside was growing, and they could not run from it. Their sergeant spoke first, laying out the facts: the questioning without cause, the shift in tone when the ID was seen, the apology made in front of the cafe crowd. The governor's chief of staff leaned forward. "Do you understand what this has done? Not just because of who she is, but because people saw how easily power can lean the wrong way." The taller officer spoke quietly. "We do understand," he said. "We have no excuse. We should have spoken with respect from the beginning." The shorter officer added, "It should not have mattered who she was. We made it matter. That was our mistake." His voice trembled as he admitted the truth, but it was the first time he spoke without defense, without pride. Instead of shouting, the governor's chief of staff surprised them by asking, "What will you do differently tomorrow if you are given the chance?" The room stayed silent for a moment. Finally, the taller officer said, "We will ask questions gently. We will remember that people sitting with a book and coffee are not criminals. We will remember that our badge is not a wall between us and the public, it is a promise to serve with fairness." The shorter officer lowered his head. "I will remember my sister," he said, repeating the words he had shared in the cafe. "I will remember that if she were sitting there, I would want her to be treated with kindness." The leadership listened. Some were skeptical, some were moved. But everyone knew this was bigger than two men. This was about training, culture, and the way authority was shown in the city. Plans were made that very day. Every officer in the department would attend special sessions on respect, communication, and community care. It would not be a one-time lecture but an ongoing practice. Meanwhile, across the city, people gathered in living rooms, on buses, and in offices, talking about the video. They spoke not about the title of governor's daughter, since most did not know it yet, but about the way Emily had handled the moment. Some admired her calm strength. Others asked themselves how they might have reacted in her place. A group of university students even printed her words, "Respect should be given to all, not only to someone with a title," and taped them on their campus walls. Emily herself did not seek attention. After finishing her errands, she returned home quietly. Her father hugged her, relieved she was safe, but she told him gently, "I am fine, father. But others may not be, if we do not change how power is used. Let us focus on them." Her voice was firm but full of care. The governor agreed. He arranged a press conference, not to name the officers, but to speak about values. Standing at a podium, he addressed the city. "Yesterday, a moment in a cafe reminded us all of something very important. Authority must be carried with humility. Respect must never depend on last names or positions. Every person deserves to sit in peace, to walk in peace, to live in peace." His words spread quickly through television, radio, and social media. In that same cafe, the little girl who had drawn Emily showed her finished picture to Mia the barista. The drawing now had more detail: tulips in a bundle, a book on the table, and two officers who were smaller than before, walking away under a sky with a bright sun. Mia smiled at it and said, "You drew the truth." The girl's mother whispered, "And sometimes the truth is enough to change people." The two officers were not dismissed. Instead, they began their training immediately. At first, they sat stiffly in the sessions, uncomfortable as community leaders explained how their words could hurt. But slowly, they began to see the faces of the people they served, not just uniforms and rules. They listened to stories from citizens who had been treated unfairly before, stories that never reached the news. Each story pressed into their minds like a lesson they should have known all along. Emily did not attend those sessions, but her presence was felt in every one of them. Her calm voice at the cafe replayed in their memories, not loud, not angry, but steady, reminding them that respect is the starting point, not the reward. By the end of the week, something new was happening in the city. Officers on the street began to change their tone. People noticed small things: gentler greetings, lighter questions, friendlier nods. They still kept order, still enforced the law, but the sharpness had softened into something better. And through it all, Emily lived quietly, never seeking credit. She continued her walks, her visits to bookstores and flower stands. People recognized her more often now, whispering kindly, but she only smiled and kept moving. She knew the lesson was not about her. It was about everyone. Her father often thought about that morning. In private, he told his advisors, "My daughter taught us more in one cafe visit than we have taught in years of speeches." He meant it. The story that had begun with tension and suspicion was turning into something much larger, a shift in how the city understood fairness, respect, and humility. And Emily's simple choice to stay calm, to keep quiet strength, to remind everyone of what respect truly means was the seed that made it grow. The days after the cafe incident unfolded like ripples spreading in a pond. What had begun as a quiet morning with a cup of coffee and a cinnamon roll became a story told across the city, and eventually far beyond it. People spoke not only of the two officers, not only of the cafe, but of the lesson that lingered in every heart that had watched or heard about it. Respect belongs to everyone, not just to those with power, wealth, or a famous name. Emily herself did not live as though she had caused a storm. She moved about her days with the same calm rhythm as before. She still walked to the bookstore, still bought flowers from the stand, still greeted people with her gentle smile. But wherever she went, people now seemed to recognize her. They looked twice, whispered softly, and sometimes approached to say, "Thank you." Emily never claimed credit. She always answered with the same words, "It was a small moment. It belongs to all of us." In the cafe, the memory of that morning grew into a kind of legend. Tourists came and asked, "Is this where it happened?" Mr. Patel would nod politely but never exaggerate the story. He would say, "Yes, but what matters is what we learned. We learned that calm can be strong." Mia, the barista, often shared with new workers how Emily had handled herself. "She didn't raise her voice," she would say. "She didn't show anger. She simply stood firm in kindness, and that made everyone listen." The little girl who had drawn Emily did not forget either. She carried the drawing folded in her school bag. Sometimes she showed it to friends. She explained, "This is the lady who taught me that you can be brave without shouting." Her teachers noticed how often she spoke about fairness and kindness in class after that. They saw how a single real-life moment could shape the way a child thought about the world. Meanwhile, the police department changed. It did not happen overnight, but the cafe story had forced leaders to look hard at themselves. New training sessions began, and this time they were not just checkboxes on a list. Officers had to listen to citizens who shared personal stories of being treated unfairly. They practiced speaking with softer tones, asking questions with care, and showing patience even in tense situations. At first, some officers resisted, saying they were already doing their jobs. But when they saw how the community responded positively, many of them began to understand. The two officers from that morning carried the heaviest lessons. Everywhere they went, they felt eyes on them, not of hatred, but of expectation. They knew they had to do better. Slowly, they did. They greeted people politely, offered help without suspicion, and reminded their colleagues to keep respect first. In time, people noticed the change. Some even said, "Those officers are different now. They listen." Emily's father, the governor, continued to speak publicly about the importance of humility in authority. In interviews, he praised his daughter's patience but always turned the focus back to the people. "Every citizen deserves what she asked for, respect without condition," he said. "That is not a gift, it is a right." His words inspired reforms in other cities too. Leaders elsewhere began reviewing how their officers interacted with the public. One afternoon, about a month later, Emily returned to the same cafe. She carried another book and wore another simple dress. This time, when the bell above the door rang, the room felt lighter. People smiled as she passed, but no one crowded her. She ordered her coffee and roll, sat at her favorite table, and opened her book. The same older man with the newspaper nodded at her from outside. Mia greeted her warmly and said, "Welcome back." A few minutes later, the door opened again, and the two officers walked in. The cafe grew quiet, but not tense this time. People waited. The taller officer approached Emily's table, his voice clear but soft. "Good afternoon," he said. "We wanted to thank you." Emily looked up and smiled gently. "For what?" she asked. For teaching us, the shorter officer answered. You gave us a lesson we will carry every day. Emily nodded. Then the morning was not wasted, she said. I am glad. The officers did not stay long. They ordered coffee, greeted Mr. Patel, and left quietly. But their visit showed everyone that change was possible. It showed that people who made mistakes could still grow into better versions of themselves. That evening, Emily walked home through the city streets. She noticed little things: an officer helping an elderly woman cross the road, a shopkeeper greeting a customer warmly, a group of students discussing fairness on the bus. She realized that the cafe morning had become more than just her story. It had become part of the city's story. As the sun set, she placed the yellow tulips she had bought that day into a vase by her window. She sat down with her book of poems and read quietly. She felt at peace, knowing that sometimes, even the smallest moments like sipping coffee in a cafe could shape how people treat each other. The story was told many times in many ways. Some said it was about a governor's daughter. Others said it was about police officers who learned humility. But those who truly understood knew it was about something simpler and greater, the quiet power of respect, and the truth that kindness is stronger than fear. And so the memory lived on, not as a tale of anger or revenge, but as a reminder that calm courage can change hearts, that fairness can spread like light, and that every person, whether powerful or ordinary, deserves dignity.